Thank you to everyone who's able to join us. Much appreciated. So today's webinar, we're going to be focused on teaching fund managers how to use events and webinars to engage with both founders and LPs. I would love if everyone could hop into, I think we have the chat on, and just let us know like where you're tuning in from. It's always great to see kind of, what coverage we have of the country or beyond. So I'd appreciate if you all could do that. Just a couple housekeeping things. The Q&A function is on. So, as you have questions or comments that pop up, please feel free to jump in there. I will be monitoring it. Likely we'll just, get to those at the end of the discussion, but feel free to drop questions in there along the way. So a little bit about me. My name is Vienna Poise. I'm the Director of Fundraising and Investor Relations at Strut Consulting. Strut basically provides fractional support to fund managers in a bunch of different areas. So operations, think, service provider management, ensuring your reporting is on time, helping work through your audit, that kind of thing. Obviously, operations is a huge bucket beyond that, but that just gives you a sense. We do fractional finance. I think that speaks for itself. Investor relations, as I mentioned, which I head up that department. And that really, you should just kind of think of like fundraising strategy, data room materials, setting up your pipeline, LP onboarding, that kind of thing. And then also transitioning into sort of reporting. And then we do marketing as well. So kind of newsletters, social media, and then lastly, events, which I think also, speaks for itself, but, it could be founder dinners, AGMs and whatnot. And of course, we'll be covering a lot on events today. And so basically we have a bunch of experts in those different departments that help support VC fund managers. So with that, I think we should go ahead and jump into the content. I'm just going to introduce our speakers very quickly. So today we have Rachel Mackey, the founder of Rachel Does Content, and we also have Lauren Young with us, head of network operations at Union Square Ventures. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to them to give a little bit more, in-depth intro of their firms and themselves.
Thank you. Rachel, would you like me to start?
Yeah, that would be great. And I'll hop in after you.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. It's very nice to meet you all today. Thank you for joining this conversation. Hopefully it's a conversation. Please ask questions, chime in. I certainly don't want to be a talking head at all of you, but my name is Lauren Young. I have been at Union Square Ventures for the last 10 years. If you go to the next slide, you can read a little bit about me. High level, I've been on the network team since joining the firm, and my role has probably been defined 4 to 5 different ways, and events has been a thread throughout my time here, and it's a big piece of how we define impact and support for our portfolio and our broader ecosystem and network. And so I'm excited to give a couple of case studies and examples of how events have been very impactful for us and our team.
Cool. I am Rachel Mackey. In terms of my professional background, I spent a little over 5 years at an early stage fund based in Chicago called OCA Ventures. I built the platform strategy there from 0 to 1 with a focus on community and marketing primarily. In my time there, I also co-founded an investor networking group for investment professionals in the Chicagoland area. It's called V2VC. And currently, I'm working on Rachel Does Content. So I do marketing and ghostwriting services for VCs and startups. I'm also the fractional head of marketing at the Artemis Fund and a platform fellow at HL Ventures. So I'm excited to be here today talking over this topic with Lauren. So in terms of the overview of what we'll cover today, We'll be talking about insights on planning and executing impactful events, how you leverage events and webinars, virtual events to build your network, grab the attention of your LPs, and attract quality deal flow. And then finally, tools and techniques for measuring your event ROI, success, and gathering the feedback you need afterwards. So I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Lauren to get us started.
Incredible. Here is a list of a few types of events. Now, I'm sure we can all think about other events that fall outside of these categories. I'm sure we've all, planned a happy hour. I'm sure we've all planned very intimate settings, very large scale summits, or we've thought about them. And I think there's pros and cons to different types of event formats. And so what we'll talk about today, and I'm sure you've all thought about this through different programming strategies, is around what is the outcome that you're hoping for? What are the goals? What are you really trying to accomplish? And whether that's for your firm, for your fund, for your portfolio network, for your LP network, target audience and ultimate outcomes should be steering the type of event that you select, which will then just help bring clarity and consistency throughout, your whole planning process. And then hopefully you'll see the outcomes that you're hoping for. Starting with the first, intimate founder and LP dinners. This is one that we do quite a bit at USV, or you can go to the next slide. That's okay. When we think about, as an example, hosting an intimate dinner, we do a lot of pre-event strategic thinking, around how are we, why do we want to organize this dinner? Why are we, bringing together, for example, a group of 15 founders? Are these founders in our portfolio network? Are they external? Are they a mix? Are they stage specific, sector specific, geographically, located in a local region? Thinking through the goals for building the invite list for a dinner of founders can actually be where we spend the most amount of time, because we find that once the dinner kicks off, USV tends to like to have more of an informal flow of an event, such as a dinner. And we can talk through all of the mechanics and tactical strategy that we take when it comes to a dinner. But I'd say the majority of our time is spent cultivating the invite list, understanding where people will sit and who they get a chance to meet, so that when they leave the dinner, they can say, oh, wow, I had a chance to sit next to Fred at USV and had a nice chat with him. And they might think that's serendipitous, but it was actually quite intentional. We also think a lot about location for that as well. And I think, if we want to just, and Rachel, jump in here, if we want to just quickly take these elements of success, and maybe you go to the next slide, we can talk about planning in particular. The next slide. One more slide. We can kind of talk about the pre-event. So Rachel, maybe if I talk about a dinner, I don't know if there's another event format you wanted to talk about, but I'm happy to start with a dinner. One thing that we've recently been doing, we've been co-hosting founder dinners. We did one last week. We did one during New York Tech Week. And it's been a very interesting case study for us, in that we typically don't co-host this style of an event. Usually we bring together 10 to 15 founders from our network. Maybe we add in a few friends, but they're all USV curated lists. And recently we've been co-hosting dinners with founders. And what's been really amazing about that, and I think there's a lot of pros and a lot of cons that we can talk through, but one of the biggest reasons why we've done it is obviously meeting founders we don't know. And so meeting founders we don't know, but in areas where we really are interested in investing, I think that combination can be really fruitful for both sides. So obviously we don't want to, and I'm sure all of your firms don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. USV has a very specific thesis in where we invest, and we do our best to meet founders and teams building in those respective areas so that the relationship can be, a win-win for hopefully both sides. But the co-host model has been interesting because you get a chance to have if we're thinking about an invite list, we get to broaden the access of that invite list, to outside of the USV scope. and then we get to meet new people, which can be fun. I think the pitfalls, and then I'll stop talking about this, but I think the pitfalls of co-hosting is, I guess, like any party you've ever been to, it's not always a 50-50 split of who does the work. And so I think setting expectations appropriately internally to say we're going to co-host with this firm, with the expectation that we do 50-50, split costs. But we're going to control the invite list. We're going to control the logistics, the venue selection, the menu, the communication. And maybe the benefit is such that it's a 50-50 cost split. But I think in times when we've tried to do 50-50 down the line of logistics, comms, preparation, post-event work, I think it tends to fall onto the one who had the idea and tends to be the organizer. So I think just be clear and consistent with how you think about co-hosting, and then communicate that to the co-host and to your stakeholders internally.
Yeah, I definitely think that makes sense. I like that model a lot. And I think that setting the expectations up front is super important. I can speak to what I have, I would say the most expertise in is just virtual events generally. I see them as really great tools to leverage your networks and reach people outside of your usual network, which I think is really important in venture in terms of just like the diversity of our networks and our investments. They're also easier to put on, a much lighter lift, usually no cost, low cost, if there is any. And another great advantage to those is it helps you build out your email list. So we always recommend people add a checkbox for event signups so that people can opt into receiving future invites and communications. We will probably touch on tools later, but I really like Luma. I think it's great. It's for virtual and in person, and I think we're probably all familiar with that, but I think it has some great functionality. In terms of a specific type of event that I've done before that I've found to be really successful, high level panel discussions and roundtables are great. They help you connect founders with LPs, founders with advisors, LPs and advisors with your investment team to build stronger relationships. There's just like so many different ways you can do these things. And to Lauren's point about the co-hosted founder dinners, I think it's a really great way to feature founders that are from like a similar business area, geographic area, just all the things we touched on a little bit earlier. You can feature your co-investors, which is great to reinforce those relationships. Your advisors, if you're a fund that is heavy on advisor relationships, which OCA definitely is, and even your investment team. So now I'm getting to the example after that long-winded explanation of virtual events, but we did deal flow roundtables at OCA, which I think was a really cool way to showcase our junior investment team and then also to engage our LPs and our advisors. So we would ask our investment team from different verticals to cover a deal from the pipeline, and that could be something we passed on, could be something that we invested in or something we're still looking at, but we used it as an opportunity to talk to our LPs and our advisors in a more intimate setting about how we were thinking about investments and like letting them know like we're competent and great when you consider us for your next fundraise, and also how can you look at this and think about our deal flow, because we had a lot of advisor deal flow coming in. So we thought that that was a really good tool. And then educational webinars for founders are great too. I think we all do that, but we would always survey the portfolio to focus in on the areas that we felt were the most important, or that the founders felt were most important, and then had kind of a bench of experts we could tap into. So finally, I'll just talk about some technical and logistical considerations and then pass it back over to Lauren. But always plan to check in advance. We hopped on here 10 minutes early today to check in with each other. Make sure your lighting's good, your background looks good. Like for instance, Lauren's background, I love it. Assign somebody to run the show. So the speakers can focus on the main thing, not the chat and running the slides. Walking through topics in advance so no one's caught off guard, and then a plan B in case someone loses connectivity. This happened to me once before. It was very scary, but my managing partner hopped in to help, so that was great. And record the webinar. I think I'll get into this a little bit later, but there's a lot of ways you can use this to your advantage with social media and blog content. So recording is super important. And yeah, that's all I have at this moment.
Amazing.
Just jumping in real quick, there was a question. I think we covered this a bit, but who do you co-host your events with? I think we covered a little bit, but if we just want to reiterate that piece.
Yes, I saw that. Thank you. We don't co-host a ton. It really depends on the topic, the format. I'll give you some recent examples. But again, it really comes up more opportunistic and less strategic. We're, going to ask someone. During New York Tech Week, we hosted 4 different events. One event with New York Tech, so Tech NYC is the organization's name. It's part of the mayor's office, and they collaborate a lot on innovation and funding and support for technology in New York City. And so we hosted a kickoff event with the New York City mayor and Tech NYC on Monday. That was, one example of a co-host model that really aligned with how we wanted to support, New York Tech Week more broadly. Tuesday afternoon, we hosted another event. This was for VCs and founders in New York City in particular, mostly early stage. And we hosted that with the General Partnership and Pace Capital and Box Group as well. And so those were more, firms that we're friendly with that happened to be interested in doing the same thing. And that came together rather serendipitously. Maybe a third example, we hosted a demo night. I can't take the credit for this. Our analysts fully deserve all the credit. We hosted a Web3 consumer social demo night. And we had 8 demo presenters showing, we call it like weird projects. So they're very early stage, really projects under the hood look at something very early stage in Web3 consumer social apps. And that was co-hosted with Variant, which is another fund. The founder is a dear friend of ours. We're actually, just huge fans of Variant, and they have some co-investments with us. So it just aligned really well. And their network, as well as our network, combined with including the demo speakers, as well as the participants in the room. That's a whole different webinar talking about demo nights. I'd be happy to talk through if people are interested in, a format that is a larger scale, 60 to 80 person demo event where you're showcasing 7 to 9, we've done as many as 12 demo presentations that are kind of lightning round. I don't want to say pitch because it's not to a room of investors, but really showcasing their product in a really, really quick way. And the format is very, kind of YC model style where everything is like the same number of slides, the same number of minutes. You get the same formulaic kind of agenda, but it really allows people to show off their creativity, but in like a safe, consistent way. So they know they have 7 minutes and they get 3 minutes of Q&A, and then they move on. So I'm happy to talk through that if that's of interest to people. Let's go to the next slide, maybe. I mean, Rachel, you and I could talk through these slides front and back. I think one, I'd love to talk through during an event, and maybe I can just parallel path 2 examples of events. And if anyone has events like formats that you're particularly interested in digging into, please put them in the chat, because whether it's intimate dinners, demo nights, large scale 150 person CEO summits, I've been running our events at USV for 10 years. We scaled our events from 15 to 200, then we scaled back. We've changed our strategy quite a few times. So I'd like to think that we can talk to many of the different types of events. But I think during an event, I like to think about success metrics when the event has kicked off in a different way. And I think there's qualitative and quantitative measurements that I keep an eye on that I think have been very helpful over the years. When an event kicks off, whether it's a webinar, a dinner, a demo night, whatever the case might be, or a summit, there's not much more you can do in the sense of preparation. It's really then about, you know, management of expectations in the room, making sure that there is a flawless execution of any AV or any talks, you know, really making sure that all of the preparation you've put into this looks as streamlined as you had hoped it would be. I think number of attendees can be a sign or an indication of sorts, but I tend not to anchor to that. I live in New York City, and the weather can be a deterrent whether you like it or not. And so if it's raining or it's cold or it's stiflingly hot, you know, that dictates event participation just across the board. And so in person versus virtual is also different. So I try to keep that in mind as well. I think good vibes really matter. And that's not something you can have on a showcase on an NPS. It doesn't really come up even sometimes in the qualitative, but reading the room can mean so much, especially to the GPs and the partners that I work with at USV. Time and time again after an event, the vibes are usually what are brought up. It tends not to be, oh, we had 80% of our invite list join us. It's usually like, wow, did you see those two people in the corner? They stayed an hour after the event ended and they were, you know, talking shop, and what an incredible moment. And we could never have envisioned the two of them making that kind of connection, but that's a real great outcome that I don't want to diminish when we talk about the success of events, because I think at least at USV, the feeling and the vibe and the outcome of an event does matter to us. And so I would suggest considering that when you're thinking about during an event. Rachel, I'm going to stop there. What else can we add during the event?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. And I've also found, I think this is something that we all tend to do, but just sort of like networking within the platform community to figure out where the best venues are, especially if you're hosting an event in a city where you aren't familiar with. There are lots of resources for that, and I definitely agree that it's very important. And then two, when we think about the quality of content, it goes back to what type of event we are putting on, but I think you need to be taking into consideration that, as well as taking a look at the guest list to see if there's any like commonalities, or if it's a more intimate dinner, to Lauren's point, who are you seating next to each other, and even using, like, in a non-cheesy way, icebreakers, prompts, like things that will help people get to know each other. Because I think it is often hard to measure the ROI of events and platform activities in general. So I think the more you're fostering connections between people, that's the most important part in terms of engaging with the community.
Great. And then we did get a question here of someone who would love to dive a little bit more into thematic intimate dinners, but particularly sort of how do we go about inviting folks that we don't know but we want to know? What are some tactics for approaching that?
Inviting guests that we don't know. Do we have, well, I guess a clarifying question that I would like to ask Allie, if you don't mind. Do you have a connection to that? Is this cold outreach on LinkedIn, or is this less cold and more, you know, we received your name from someone? Can be warm outreach via investors. Okay, great. We've done this a ton. We do this a lot. When, you know, an intimate dinner most recently that we hosted was in LA. We had 6 to 8 of our founders from our portfolio and maybe 5 or 6 friends. And we consider them friends. You know, these are people that are referred to us that come from a trusted source, whether it's a friend of USV, an LP, a former founder, someone in our network, an alumni from our portfolio. anyone who's referred to us, we tend to consider vouched for. And in that case, a lot of times, myself or the partners will reach out. I do a lot of that actually as well. You had mentioned you want to get more involved. I would strongly encourage you to get more involved, because I think, and this is a whole different webinar, but I think it's wonderful to have the heads of, the network teams, the platform teams, the operators on the VC side reaching out and building relationships, because it's yet another safe relationship that they can have with the firm, instead of just knowing they can go to the GPs for another time. But I would just say to reach out and really make them feel welcome and encouraged to come. And I think there are different ways to incentivize. You can be quite direct with that. You can be indirect. It could be something as simple as, we're getting a group of 8 incredible founders together in your local area. We'd love to have you join us. I've done ones where I say, hey, Andy Weissman, one of our partners, is hosting a music dinner with founders. Would you like to join? Again, that's another incentive, but quite different. And I think sometimes just making them feel welcome. I've never been a founder, but I've heard many times from founders that it can be a very lonely and scary place to be. And so treating them with respect and just positive encouragement that you're hoping for them to join your dinner, because they will get value as well as you will get value, I think goes a long way. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'd love to turn it over, authenticity. Like we in the 10 years I've been at USV, I am constantly reminded of how fortunate we are to sit in the desks that we do. And the partners are the first to tell me, these founders are busy. We don't want to take up their time unless it's worth their time. How do we convey that in a really authentic USV way? Because they're invited to a lot of things, but how do we make this a little bit different? So taking it a step ahead and not just saying, we need more bodies in this dinner, but rather, we want you to join us because we think that this will be wonderful for you as well.
Rachel, do you have anything to add there, or we can move to another question?
No, I feel like that was beautifully said. So we can to the next one.
Nice. Okay, so the next question is whether you have worked with sponsors in the past, and if so, kind of how do you go about sourcing them and working with them?
Yeah,
go Rachel.
Yeah, I'll just speak to this briefly and hand it over to you. But in terms of when I've worked with sponsors in the past, I think that definitely it really depends on sort of like what's going on in the broader economic environment, what's going on at that time of year, who are you targeting, and how are you building your relationships with sponsors. I think that's something that is super important to think about. And so when I was thinking that through, I had companies that I wanted to target that I thought would be beneficial to have like a partnership with our portfolio in terms of the broader impact of having a founder resource library and discounts for our founders, and actually adding value versus, to Lauren's point, like our founders are so busy, like we don't want to make this any noisier than it needs to be. And so really being strategic about who you want to partner with, not thinking about it as a transactional thing. Like, of course, like that is, I don't know how to phrase this. That's like an aspect of it, right? Because we're both wanting something on either side. But I think VC is such a relationship-based business. It's so important to never treat anybody in a way that's transactional and to try to, be authentic always. And so there's that piece, just sort of like you're gearing yourself up mentally for your sponsors. But then also I created a deck, like here's some sponsorship levels. And we did that with V2VC, our networking group as well. Like, here's how you'll benefit. Here's, who you'll get to meet. We'll do a spotlight in our newsletter for you. We will, highlight you at the event. Like, highlighting like the ways that they're going to benefit as well, and also just setting it up for the longer term. And I think it doesn't always have to be the usual suspects. Like, we don't have to be like aiming for like the biggest players in every category. Like, there are definitely smaller, you know, law firms that we partnered with, which was an interesting play, or you know, banks, which is the obvious one, but the service providers as well. So I think my summary is, you know, think about it ahead of time, make sure you're choosing the right people, have your value proposition ready, you're selling it to them, and just go from there. But Lauren, I don't know if you have more thoughts on more specifics around that.
I think that what you said was great. No, and I have not had much experience with getting sponsors, so I think you spoke to that one.
Cool.
Great. Another question from Erin Kim is, how do you think about monetization of events? Is like financial ROI something that you're tracking, or is it really just, you know, you're like, it's more like you're tracking value outside of that? Is there a financial component for you?
Great question, Erin. I have not tracked our events in any kind of ROI way. I'm trying to think about an example where I have.
I think, Lauren, my immediate thought was, I haven't either, but I think in terms, if you're thinking about monetizing something, if that's going to be like part of your platform strategy, I think like communities are the easier way. Virtual communities are an easier way, like membership wise. I guess, again, that's like a whole other webinar, but yeah, I haven't really thought about that one either, to be honest.
Okay, no worries.
I get one thing to add to that as like a question for you. I think there are a lot of investment teams, like the general partners or the investors at your firm or at firms, that are hoping to track ROI on events. If you have a champion on that team or a partner on that team that's willing to work with you to structure that, that's my only recommendation. A lot of times I've heard people say, you know, hey, my GP wants me to track the success of our events, and one piece of it is ROI. I would just be careful and cognizant with that, because again, events take many different forms. They touch a lot of different stakeholders. And success to me is defined very differently based on the format, the stakeholders, the, you know, ultimate objectives for each event. Each event I treat very, very differently. And so if you're being asked to do that, or if you're hoping to do that, I would recommend or encourage to work with the investors on your team. If there's, you know, your lead or someone that's just willing to work with you on structuring that, and start small, you know, maybe start with one event and see how it goes. And then, you know, kind of use that as a case study to say, okay, great, our ROI on this founder dinner was this, and here's how I'm defining it, and here's how I'm thinking about doing this for the other events. I'd love feedback. It's just like any founder, when you build a product and you think everyone's going to love it, and then you go to market and no one uses it. You know, I treat my job very similar to that. Like, I'll build a straw man product of, you know, an expert network, for example, and I'll go to the partners with 10 people on a list instead of 100, because I know what they're going to do. They're going to poke holes in it. They're going to change it. They're going to, you know, morph it into something else. And I'm a team of one. So I don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to build something full stack to then have it ripped down. I think I would treat the ROI piece the same.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice for sure. We have one more question in the chat, and then we can move forward with the presentation. So as we know, events are quite expensive, and probably more expensive now than ever. Where do you two think is like a good place to spend your budget, and what can you kind of skip over and not spend too much time on, or too much money on rather?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I need to like think about that a little. I want to, my initial reaction is spending, it really depends on like the goals of your funds and your partners, but I think that intimate gatherings and dinners are a good place to put the money. If you already have a pretty established brand, I think if your goal is to elevate your brand in the market, and kind of establish yourself more within your own ecosystem, then you want to do bigger events that are more like happy hours, mixers, that kind of thing. So it kind of depends. I don't know, Lauren, what do you think about that?
I was in my head thinking back to our portfolio summit that happened a month ago. And our portfolio summit is our annual CEO retreat that we do. We've been doing for 17 years. And I've owned that for the last maybe 9 years. And I treat it like a wedding. And I say that in a funny way because it is a huge event for us at this point. We take the founders away for a 2-night stay. This past month, we went to Gurney's in Montauk. We basically took over the hotel. We did dinners out. It was just a full scale, to me, wedding. And why I say that is because when you think of a budget for any large stage event, as a firm, we want to prioritize and therefore spend more on certain aspects, like taking them to Gurney's and the transportation that we did to and from, and the restaurants and the food. And where we don't spend the money or don't prioritize spending the money is everything from floral and decor, like a wedding, and that's why I'm laughing. But also, we don't spend any money on speakers or entertainment or any kind of external high level costs, bringing in a public or celebrity level speaker. We don't prioritize doing that. Therefore, the budget for that is zero. Where we spend the money is anytime we can get small groups of our CEOs, and I'm using this summit as an example. I think, to Rachel's point, this takes form very similarly in our dinners and things like that. Anytime we can get an intimate group together and get them talking, and we do 2.5 days worth of programming, largely around breakout sessions, intimate sessions, fireside chats, but all centered around getting them talking. That's where we want to spend the most amount of time, and not necessarily the most amount of money, but I'd say to us, a large scale event or even our dinners, we spend the most amount of money on the venue and the food, and then we curate everything else to the best of our ability in-house. Yeah, I think events can be very expensive. I've watched the cost of that event and other events tick up 20-30% in the last year or two. So I'd be cautious because teams do want to see the return on events, and the budget is only so large. And what I've seen change over the years is that in order to get a larger budget, you have to prove the event's successful or prove that community is worth spending time on. And I think you could take it from both angles. Like, to us, another example, we do a lot with what we call leadership circles. And these are our C-level executives across our portfolio. We have 7 leadership circles, functionally focused. There's about 1,000 members across them. We built them 4 years ago, and we spend a lot of time working with them, curating content, curating moments when they can get together. And we didn't once do that, but as we saw that they were more and more successful, I then tacked on an in-person annual summit for all 7 of them. And to get the budget to do that, I was able to say these have had this amount of traction. We've had this amount of engagement. We're hearing amazing things from our CEOs about these leadership circles. Now's the time for us to really bring them together in person. So selling that internally, it is helpful to see some traction or engagement or some kind of stickiness with a community. And then, hopefully that will also impact your bottom line. Long-winded answer.
Good answer.
All right, should we go to the next slide? And please keep asking questions. I think Rachel and I would much prefer to talk about things you want to talk about.
Yeah, definitely.
Post-event, we touched on a little bit, I guess. One thing, and Rachel, I'd love you to talk about the social media aspect, pre, during, and post, your take on that as well. But I guess the one thing I'll say about post-event, more times than not, and this is like a communication thing. I think in my role, at least, I communicate a lot with the attendees ahead of time and a lot with the speakers ahead of time. And then the event happens. And I think communication can tend to trail off or even not happen post-event. And I've found some pretty great traction and success when I send a follow-up note to the participants, connecting them with each other. And enabling them to say, hey, here's the list of 15 people that came to the dinner that you attended. Here's their emails. I hope you guys can stay in touch. And you have to be careful with that, depending on the community, depending on who's on the list. There's obviously, there could be tape around, constraints there. I would encourage you to push a little past that, because a lot of times when I send a note out to everyone, thank you so much for coming. Here's the participant list. Please keep in touch. And I include their LinkedIn and I include their email. 9 times out of 10, someone, is like, thank you so much. I couldn't remember that person's name that I sat next to, and now I get to connect with them. Or I didn't get a chance to meet that presenter, but I really wanted to send them a note. I think that goes a long way, and you tend to see more of that ROI happen, because events have a long tail impact and it's hard to track, but that's one way that we've found more impact after the event.
Yeah. I think that-
Oh, go ahead, Rachel. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I think that's like a really good method of follow-up, because I think a lot of the time, even this is another topic I could go off on in another webinar, but I think with networking in general, I think we sort of, get ready for the pre-event, and then it happens and we meet somebody super cool, and then we miss that follow-up piece. And yeah, I think that's a really good way to make sure you hit that point, which is just as important as the rest of it.
Yeah,
I just want to clarify. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, there's a question for you, Lauren, in the chat, which is, what is the objective around the CEO leadership circles, and how often are you putting those on?
To clarify, these leadership circles are for the C-suite underneath the CEO. And we found that we launched these in January of 2020, and the impetus for them was that our CEOs were asking for help for their leaders. And whether it's a seed stage company and it's them and 2 colleagues, one being the other co-founder, the CEOs in most cases said, I have a lot of support. My leadership is flailing. They need peers. They need a safe space to talk. They need tools. They need resources. They need help. How do I get that so that they're not coming to me for that help? They're going to their peers. And so the leadership circles were born out of that request from our CEOs. And they were created in addition to that point, which I think is very, very important. And it goes back to being authentic. The CEOs requested this support lever. We then created leadership circles. And the way we created them was we said to our CEOs and our HR leaders, hey, you asked for this. Can you please nominate your colleagues to enroll in these leadership circles? Here's what they'll get. They'll get a directory. They'll get a Google group. They'll get, at the time 4 years ago, recurring events and webinars and resources. But please, nominate your colleagues. We got incredible response to that. And also it made the leaders, the CFO, the CMO, the CPO, the CTO feel so supported by their CEO that they were nominated because their CEO thought that they could use this. And it was just a wonderful way to launch, because it felt like your investors not forcing you into this group or community, but rather we built it out of the necessity that we've heard. Your CEO nominated you. You might enjoy it. It's opt-in. You don't have to, but if you'd like to enroll, here's the benefits. And to answer the last piece of that, so we do an annual summit for all 7 leadership circles, and then we have a listserv, a Google group, and then recurring remote sessions, depending on the topics that are being requested.
Super clever. I love that. It like creates immediate buy-in. Love that.
Well, and what was wild about launching in January 2020 was that a couple months later, the world changed, and those leadership circles were more important than ever. And what we saw, whether it was our general counsel group or our HR leaders, they were turning to this listserv and this directory, and they were organizing calls themselves. They were turning to this trusted group of peers to say, hey, I have to lay off 30% of my team. What do I do? Or we have no idea how to manage expectations across our 10, 20, 500,000 person company around, their health, their wellness, their travel, their whole world. What do we do? And it was a positive light coming out of that moment of ambiguity that we were all facing in 2020. A really neat outcome to see that they could turn to each other because of that trusted space, because they were nominated by their CEO, because they felt like, this isn't some group that I've just been subscribed to. There was intention behind it.
Yeah.
Love that.
I wanted to clarify on the slide, and then we can move on, because I, want to stop talking, but I put AKA after party for the internal postmortem. We do our best after most events to do a postmortem as a team. Brian at True Ventures gave me this term that he uses at True. They call it their after party. And I don't know why. I just found it cheeky and fun. And I tried it at USV. It didn't fall as the right way I wanted it to, but I understand the sentiment of getting the whole team to come together to say, hey, that was a great event, or hey, next time we need to do this. Really 24 hours later, having a team after party to say, what was good? What should we change? Should we do this again? If so, what do we do? So that's to that point.
Yeah. I think I can add a couple things I was thinking about around just the post-event communications. So when we're thinking about follow-up, obviously, I think Lauren's advice is great in terms of keeping people connected. I also think if you have a photographer at the event, or if you have any photos of the event that are good, it's always great to share those with the attendees in your follow-up. I think that really helps drive that sort of like post-event engagement, especially on LinkedIn. Like, LinkedIn, your posts are always going to perform better if there's a photo, even better if it's a great photo. I think a really good example of this recently was the Recast Capital Summit for emerging managers. Like, it was just all over LinkedIn because they did such a good job of, I think, their communication and post-event follow-up, and just making it easy for people to share. And then another thing that we did at OCA, depending on the type of event, would be sending out like thank you gifts after. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but maybe something small and thoughtful. And I always try to stay away from swag because I think that can come off as not a gift. So something a little bit more thoughtful than that. I need to think about it, but I do have a few good recommendations if anybody's looking for gift service ideas. And then the other thing, going back a little bit more to the pre-event stuff, but just around like your social media and how you're helping to promote the events. Again, I'm going to caveat everything I say with this just depends on the type of event you're doing, but, making graphics is super important. you can create speaker card graphics for each individual speaker, if that's the type of event you're doing, and give them pre-written copy to share on their socials. I think that always helps people be more proactive about helping you promote your event rather than reactive, which is, I think, a position we end up in sometimes, depending on how experienced we are with doing events. And then, you know, having someone on your team, which, like Lauren said, a lot of us are just teams of one, but so it might be you, but making sure you're getting headshots, bios, approval from the speakers on the content and what we can share or not share about them. And then just emails too, going back to that, but on the pre-event side, writing copy for people. So if you have speakers that can promote your event in their newsletter, great, write copy for them, send it their way. Or, you know, you need to promote it in your own newsletter. And we always think it's really good to send one standalone email on the event topic if it's within your workflow and bandwidth. And I think there was one more thing I wanted to go back to post-event, but like we were talking about earlier with recording webinars, if you're doing something virtual, I think when you're doing your after party, your postmortem, whatever you want to call it, I think you should also be thinking about how are we going to leverage this for our marketing strategy overall? Can we turn this into a blog that we write about and share on LinkedIn? Like, how do you think about thought leadership in relation to your event strategy? So yeah, a lot to consider for sure with the post-event stuff.
Love it. All right, we've only got a few minutes left here. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A function.
I think everyone asked their questions maybe.
Right? Yeah, appreciate everyone's participation along the way. It was really nice. Makes it a lot more natural and keeps us ensuring that, you know, all of the topics are of interest to you all. So much appreciated. And thank you so much to Lauren and Rachel. Really appreciated. This was super interesting and a lot of like good tactical takeaways that I think folks can do a lot with. So really appreciate that. As last bit, you know, I covered a bit on what Struck Consulting does. One of the things that we do cover is, you know, events and marketing, along with a bunch of other things that I covered earlier in the call. But we do have an offer, a summer offer right now. So if anyone is interested in a retainer, we are giving 15% off through the summer. I think it ends September 15th. So reach out. We've got the email here if anyone is interested. We will be sharing the recording for everyone who attended. We will be doing our post-event follow-up, so you'll be receiving that from us shortly. And I think that's about it. Thank you so much again to Lauren and Rachel and to all of the attendees. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.